the producer and me, I hadn't sent my release back. I didn't get my recorder out. I'm like, did I even brush my teeth today? Like I'm doing just not following any of the rules.
The show is about the messy parts of life and producing. And this is exactly it. Just because we can perceive you to have it all together when you're in your work life, I'm sure you do, but now the tables are turned a little bit, and that's cool. That's okay. That's how it is. So I'm so happy that you responded to my unsolicited email and said yes to this interview, because as a very big listener and follower and just lover of Esther Perel and her podcast, that was how I found you, because you're her podcast producer. But then in our pre sort of interview conversation, I really loved getting to know you and sort of like zoom out, pun intended, scope of your journey. And so I'd love to just take it to the beginning and tell us how you got started, how you found your way into podcasting.
Sure. I feel like I did a very traditional path, and I feel like there are so many more creative, fun ways to do this now. And people are kind of coming in from very different facets of the world and finding audio. I went to journalism school. I thought I wanted to be a TV reporter, made the rounds for a little while and realized I definitely could not hack it as a TV reporter. I applied for an internship at NPR, and for some reason they wanted me. And they basically took me in at 23, raised me, taught me how to cut tape, taught me how to write to sound, taught me really about news judgment and all kinds of things that I couldn't even have fathomed. And I worked in and out of public radio for about 10 years. And that's generally how people kind of my generation came up. I mean, that was really the only training grounds that you had for podcasting was, local radio or something like NPR. And, now there are so many other aspects and other houses and other places to kind of come in, and people are coming in from TV and coming in from film and all kinds of, and we're all this big melting pot of audio making. It's very fun.
Is it exciting, or is there some sort of like territorial turf wars, do you feel?
I mean, yes. I feel like podcasting is still small enough, and maybe TV is very much like this. That's not my world, but podcast is still small enough where we all know each other in the sense like we either went to each other's wedding, or we interned together, or we used to work for so-and-so, or we went to college with them. Like we all, like the Venn diagram of who's who, pretty much there's a lot of overlap. And now we've all made projects for each other too.
I was thinking that we have in film, we use this idea of like 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. You guys should have one for 6 degrees of separation from Ira Glass. Like if someone wants to make that Venn diagram, like I would sign up for it. That's awesome.
But Ira's the godfather. And yes. So I'm sure he'd hate me saying that. Yeah, he'd hate me saying that, but it's very true.
It is. I mean, it's so many people who now are thriving in the podcast space, which, stemmed from radio, all learned from him. It seems like every podcast I've listened to, you name it, there's always Ira Glass is mentioned somewhere. And he has sort of brushed, the strokes of someone's career along the way, it seems. And I think it speaks volumes to, his knowledge and his, just the way that he approaches the subject. I think it's incredible.
But I have 2 things to say about that. But one is Kevin Bacon. Like, why Kevin Bacon? I mean, I've heard this too. And I met Kevin Bacon once, but, and Kira Sedgwick lives in my neighborhood in New York. So I see her, you can tell you walk down the street and suddenly like there's someone walking who's very small with an aura around her. And you're like, oh my God, that's a famous person. That's Kira Sedgwick. But that's not what I was going to tell you. What is it about Kevin Bacon? Because I think we could do the same thing for Ira, and there's a reason for Ira, but why is it Kevin Bacon? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I have to look it up. I wonder if it's because he worked on so many movies. Like he was just one of those ubiquitous actors, maybe in like the 90s. And that like at some point, at some point, everybody had worked with or met Kevin Bacon, Or it could just be one person made it up one day and it stuck. There's a lot of weird things like that in Hollywood that make no sense. That could be one of them, but I'll make a show note to look into it.
Yeah, no, seriously. But the thing about Ira that makes sense is that not only has Ira, like he's incredibly generous of spirit. So if you were to call him and say like, I'm working on this thing, is this horrible? Is this interesting? He's very honest and could be very open with you about why that thing you're trying to do would be really hard, because maybe it would be really boring. Or, there are a lot of new things that he's launched, and not because he had to, it's because someone sent him something and said, I'm working on this. What do you think? And he's like, I think I want to make this part of a This American Life episode, which is an incredibly amazing launching pad to the world. And he does that because he heard something in someone else's project and wants to share it with the world on his platform, and not because he necessarily gets anything out of it except interesting content,
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I think when you get to be at that level where your name is just so well known in the marketplace, I think that's the best journey one can have, is to get there and have the power and have the resources and be a conduit for others to get where they're going. I think that's got to be the greatest gift. And that's like, years down the line for me, that's one of the things that I'm most excited about, is to help others, raise other people up, pass the baton where I can, and help, give others that sense of possibility early on, because I think it can be so challenging to start anything new. It's so scary. And then I think to even reach out to someone like that and then get a response back, it's really life affirming, I would say, for a lot of people. You can swap out Ira for anyone that you maybe look up to, but it can be one of those like pivoting moments in someone's journey. And that's so exciting.
And Ira actually really helped launch Where Should We Begin?
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
So Ira's mother was a therapist, and a pretty famous one. And in fact, one of Esther's, God, I can't remember, it's been too long. I think it was Mating in Captivity. I can't remember if it was Mating in Captivity or State of Affairs. Those are the two books Esther Perel wrote. One of them was loosely grounded in research that Ira's mother had done. Esther had never met her. I believe her name is Shirley Glass. Don't quote me on that, but a Google search you can pull that up.
Yes.
And she did a lot of work in Chicago. And so Ira is the product of a therapist child, and I think is fascinated with the inner workings of relationships and why we do what we do and what motivates us as individuals. And we sent an early episode of Where Should We Begin before it had come out into the world. Sorry, let me turn off my notifications, to Ira. And he was completely riveted and said he wanted to have Esther on. And they spent, 2.5 hours in the studio. And this is right as Ira had filed for divorce. And it had come out in Page 6. And, if you're a radio nerd or an audio nerd, you had probably read about it.
Yeah.
And I think Ira was processing a lot of what was going on in his life with Esther through the lens of this show. And a lot of what they talked about obviously did not end up in the interview, but it was cool. It was really cool to sit with. And, Esther brings her own ideas, and, sitting across from her, she sees more than you ever say. She hears the unspoken, she sees the unseen, she looks into your eyes and she sees your inner darkness. And I'm pretty sure that weirded Ira out. And you feel compelled to share things with her. I feel like sometimes that it just feels like an out of body experience, because she's looking at you and there's no small talk. There's no, what did you have for dinner? Or I saw this. She likes movies and theater and all of that, but it's just not what you think of to say to her. And so suddenly you're pouring your soul out.
Right.
And she'll go there,
Yeah.
So anyway, she's not afraid to ask, and Ira wasn't afraid to answer. And basically, as the show was launching, when we were at Audible, he put out a segment on a black hole. The episode, the theme was black holes. And it was a couple who had spent 45 years together, I think.
Mm.
And he had been a sex addict for probably on and off for 35 years of those 45 years. And the wife was deciding to stay with him. And her children were saying, "What are you thinking?" Her children didn't want to speak to her, didn't want to speak to him. And yet she wanted to stand by her man. And anyway, it was a really incredible episode because for me, that was the first episode when I was like, we all suffer from the same shit. We just have never had a vocabulary to talk about it.
Interesting. Yeah.
I haven't been married for 45 years. I don't think my husband is a sex addict. I don't think he's hooking up with people on Craigslist that I know about. But I heard so much of my own life in that episode. But on paper, I would have thought I had nothing in common. And I know that's not unique to me. I think that's why people come back to this show, is because they really do hear themselves in the lives of others.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, some of the episodes I've listened, and I made my then boyfriend at the time listen along with me, which I don't know if that was the best decision, just casual leisure listening podcasts on the way to some event. But it really is true, like regardless of the gender of the couples or their sexual preference or orientation or any of that stuff just goes out the window, and you may not have the same problems, but you really do relate on such a deep level to the concerns. And what I love about the show is that Esther sort of zooms out a little bit, like you zoom in, zoom out. You're constantly doing this where you're in this moment with this couple, but then when you come out, Esther can tell you, you have your own preconceived ideas of what either person is saying or whose side you're on or whatever. And then she can zoom out and just say, so all that's happening here is that these two people are speaking a different language. That's all that's happening. There's no real problem. It's just reframing the way that they're talking to each other so they can actually understand each other. And it's just like mic drop, because it just shines a light onto things in such a unique way that for me, like, it helped me navigate conversations and relationship dynamics, not just romantic ones, in a way where I can I always have like Esther's always like in the back of my mind, it's like, what is actually happening between these two people? Even if I'm in that situation, I always try to dissect it because I'm also fascinated by psychology and understanding why we do things. Not to make this a love fest about Esther as much as I love her.
But it's fine. I mean, I'd
Because
love to talk about Esther. I could talk about her all day.
Because I do want to just get back to you a little bit. When we were previously talking, you had mentioned meeting her for the first time and kind of being brought into the fold of the podcast. So will you share that story with us?
Sure. Let's see. So when I met her for the first time, it was to pitch her. And I had seen a slide deck. We had hired a consultant when I worked at Audible to kind of come up with, like, this woman came from TED. Her name was June Cohen, the woman who we was working with, and she used to prep the TED speakers. So she knew all of the really amazing women who had given TED Talks probably in the last decade. And she came in with a slideshow of all these women who didn't have a podcast but needed one. And Esther was on a list of those. And so she kind of was the matchmaker for this, or kind of brokered this meeting. She was my in. And I remember we met at a hotel for breakfast with her chief of staff and this woman, June, and I. And I remember sitting across from her and like nervously just pitching my heart out. And she said nothing. She just stared at me in a way that Esther does. And I remember being like, I cannot tell if she thinks I am the dumbest person in the world or if I'm really onto something, because there was nothing. There was no facial expression to read, nothing. And as we got up to go, well, we all posed for a picture, which I think in retrospect is hilarious, because if it hadn't gone well, I still had this like memory of my breakfast with Esther Perel. She agreed to the picture, and then we were standing outside the restaurant, and she said, I don't make podcasts. I don't listen to them. I don't think she even knew what one was, honestly, at this point. She said that she'd been approached by many television companies, production companies, who wanted to film her, and she was always a no. But she said, come to my office. I will let you record, and then we will talk. And so that turned into, I chose 3 couples that she would do a session with, and I would record the sessions and listen. And then we would decide if any of them would warrant a pilot or what we would do here. And I didn't exactly know what I was looking for when I was screening the couples and choosing them. So I chose like 3 very different couples from very different walks of life. They were all New Yorkers because at that point I didn't have any money to fly people in. Now we actually do fly people in from all over the country, which is cool. But, and I remember sitting outside of her office listening with the engineer, Paul and I. We were sitting in the waiting room of her office and we were sobbing and we were texting our partners on the phone and just being like, all the things that were happening with that couple. And that couple, they were dealing with like impotence and like no sex for the last 10 years, which I haven't even been married for 10 years. So like that was not what was happening with me. But there were so many moments that I wanted to share with my partner. And so did Paul, who was texting his wife. And so we were like looking at each other thinking, oh my God, this is so powerful. What we're hearing is so powerful. We have to share this with the world. We have to figure out how to take that and make that into something that's viable that other people can hear too.
And then you did.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was this like beautiful crafted pitch that I pitched her, which was this heavily curated, heavily edited concept was not at all what we did. Because I realized in listening to her that people don't start and end their stories at the same places, even if they're telling their same story. You know, if you come in with your partner and you come to talk about your relationship, you might start it yesterday and he might start it 6 months ago. You know, so it's not like I could do this side by side comparison of he said, she said, or he said, or whatever the sexual orientation is of the couple. Like, that's not how you tell a story. And that's certainly not how you go to therapy.
Right.
But I've never been to therapy, except now I've sat through many hundreds of hours of therapy, other people's. So I didn't really exactly know what to expect when I started this. And that's Esther's favorite joke whenever we go and do a live show or something together. She loves to tell people that she found the only person in Manhattan who's never seen a therapist.
Maybe that's why she felt drawn to you. You were untapped.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, she's always asking me if I've read this or this. And they're always therapy books. Have I read this? Like in conversation, I'm like, no, Esther, I have never read a therapy book. You know, and then she looks at me like, I cannot believe that. But I think I know how to tell a story, and she obviously understands how to conduct a therapy session. And somewhere, you know, our skill sets overlap, but they don't, they complement, they don't compete against each other. And somehow it's a really nice balance, I think.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about what it's like to be a podcast producer. How would you define that?
You know, and I think this is true in any genre in which you work as a producer. You know, you used to feel, or at least I did, I used to feel like the producer did so much of the work, but you were always the backstage presence. You know, you were never the person in front of the spotlight. You were never the person on camera. You were never the person in front of the microphone or behind the microphone. But I feel like now you're not really this silent part of a production anymore. Like producers are so much more considered now talent or in the limelight, or, you know, I don't think you would have been wanting to interview me 10 years ago because no one would have cared about producers. But now it's like, it's an okay thing to be now. And it's, you're not a wannabe reporter or a wannabe host. You know, you're like, you made this decision to be a producer because you have this unique skill set and you really run a production. I think my mother still wonders what a producer does exactly.
Yes.
And I think
the mothers of everybody
yeah.
I've had on the show still wonders that. So.
Yeah. Especially like podcast producing. Because, you know, if you produced a television show, your mom wouldn't know what you did exactly, but like she could point to the thing that you made and other people could watch it. But like a lot of moms, not mine, thankfully, but a lot of moms, you know, still are not really down with how to download a podcast.
Yeah.
It depends, you know.
It
Some
depends.
of them are super cool, but
So then I guess, how would you define then what an audio podcast producer is and how it's evolved since you've started?
You know, I feel like producer means it's a jack of all trades for anything. You know, you can be an entry level producer who's pulling cuts and doing research and writing questions. Um, you can be a producer who actually reports the story and who is the voice of a story. You know, you can be if you think about Brian Reed, who made Serial, he's he's a producer. I think he would self ID as a producer, but he was so much more than what we think of as just a producer on that series, especially. Um, but yeah, I mean, and then there's the confusion between executive producer. And I feel like in TV, that means one thing, in audio, it means another.
What does it mean in audio?
If you're an EP of a project in audio, it means you do everything from edit the podcast, produce the podcast. You may even, you probably run the budget. You probably wrote the budget. You probably have gone out and found a distribution partner to actually cover the budget. You probably pick the host. I mean, it's your baby. It's your vision. You fight for it. And I get the impression that I think there are some EPs in TV that do that, but I don't think that they necessarily, EP can also be, I think in the television world, what am I looking for? An honorary credit that you will give some.
Yes.
And
so then is there like a hierarchy of titles in the audio world? Would you go from like executive producer to what's like the typical, there one?
No, I've been working on a documentary project for TV, and I really understood, like, you can Google the hierarchy of what a television producer's hierarchy is in TV. It doesn't quite work like that for audio, and it sort of depends where you are, who you work for. If you work in like a union-run newsroom, like NPR, you would probably start as an assistant producer and then go up to associate and then be a producer, senior supervising producer, executive producer. I feel like a shop like mine, we just hire producers and we don't get too picky about it. But then if you're the owner of a project, in the sense of like, it is your baby and you live and breathe and die by it, then you're the executive producer of it. But it really, it totally just depends. If you're a senior producer, you've probably been working in the field for about 10 years. Your pay normally reflects that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it really varies from place to place.
Yeah. Interesting. So what responsibilities do you say, like for you specifically with where you're at now in your career, what are some of the things like day to day for you as a producer? What kind of stuff are you doing?
I mean, I run a small production company. We're a really boutique little place. I mean, there's 10 of us. We have a small office in Midtown, New York. So I do everything from, go out and pitch a project, to write the budget for a project, to figure out who should host the project, to literally making the project. But at the same time, like, I also make coffee in my office. If the cleaning lady is not there, but once a week, like, we take out the trash, we break down the boxes, water the plants, like.
Well, it's like you're a business owner, entrepreneur, on top of also being a podcast creator, content creator, though I hate that word. Like, so I think you're juggling two different worlds, where it sounds like maybe before you had magnificent noise, if you were just freelancing, you probably had a very different set of responsibilities that may have included making the coffee, but maybe not so much dealing with some of the other businessy kind of stuff.
Yeah. And like, I will give you an example of a show like Where Should We Begin only has really 2 producers and then a sound designer. So it's a really small production staff.
Yeah.
And we've been doing a season on couples under lockdown for the
Mm.
last, I don't know, 8 weeks. And really, because everyone else is sort of on other things, it's just been me. And then the sound designer will come in at the end and make everything sound beautiful and pace it and put in some music. But I've been sweating it by myself in lockdown for the last 8 weeks.
How's that been going?
Not great. But it is, the night hours are my favorite, editing sometime after 9:30, 10 o'clock until 2. I really find my stride. You really figure out whether you're a morning person or a night person, I feel like, and during this lockdown, especially if you have kids, because you have to pick when you can work. But it has been really interesting for the last couple of weeks, because normally if you had applied for the podcast and you lived anywhere else outside of the US, I wouldn't have called you. And for the lockdown series, I just went through the applications and I called everyone who lived in countries that had really been affected by the virus.
Mm.
And I had conversations about relationships that I would never have had. And I've always wanted to do an international season, like looking at love in other languages.
Mm.
And so this gave me a little bit of dipping my toe in the water of what that can look like. So it's been really exciting. And, it could influence future seasons of Where Should We Begin, I think.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And so this was Esther and I thinking we just really needed to do something in response to where we were and what we were all dealing with. Esther is upstate, kind of in lockdown herself, and I'm in New Canaan, Connecticut. Like, we're both in places we don't normally live, and everyone is, or a lot of people are. Or spending more time in their bedrooms than they're used to.
Yeah. Case in point.
Yeah, no, exactly.
My podcast studio is also my bedroom.
Yeah. Well, I have built like 6 of these for various hosts. It's like pillow forts, like, can we clean out a closet and then like put your duvet up and like make a little studio. But this season has only been 4 episodes. So we just did kind of a mini season, because season 4 of Where Should We Begin is actually coming out in June.
Cool.
We've been working on that for the last 8 months.
Wow.
But then this sort of interrupted the flow of that. So I stopped that to work on this. So yeah, there's one more episode that's coming out actually this week, and the couple's in Nigeria.
Nice. So unfortunate, the circumstances, but what a unique opportunity to go deep into love during this time. They said, divorce rates are probably going to go up tremendously now that people have to really be with their spouse, which is, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but this is not the time or place. But it's fascinating, that it's like it's like Esther likes to say, throughout one person's life, you're going to have 3 to 4 relationships. But if it's going to be with the same person, that's for you to decide, which I love. I love that. And sense of renewal, commitment, renewal.
She can find a way. This is probably telling you more about me than I should, but she can find this way of always seeing a path for a couple where like I can be like, there is just no way this is going to work out. Like I can talk to them and decide that I'm going to put this couple in front of Esther and she's going to tell them, I'm so sorry, but I don't see a path forward for you. But she can always like wade through the bullshit and then figure it out. And so it became this thing. I think it took me 3 seasons to find a couple where she told them, finally, I think you guys should just be friends. And I was like, oh my God, 30 couples. And finally, you don't see the path for someone. I mean, I was so amazed. But we did, in this lockdown series, the 4 couples were really interesting. The first one was in Italy, and it was the height of what was happening in Italy, right as the US started to lock down. And it was a couple who, he was used to being the guy who was never home. And suddenly his wife, who was a midwife, had to go out every day and work her shifts and birth babies in a hospital with COVID patients. So he has to stay home. They had 3 kids. He's becoming the guy who makes breakfast, lunch, and dinner, puts the kids to bed, and was suddenly seeing his wife in a very new light, and where they had missed each other for years, and he thought it wasn't going to work out for them. And this COVID kind of rekindled that for them.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And then there was another couple in Germany where they had split up a year ago because she took a job and moved away, and took the kid and moved away, and he promised he'd come. And it took COVID for him to finally go to Germany to be with his family. And she so desperately wants him to stay. She loves him so much. This is like exactly what she wanted. And she's worried when COVID is done, he'll go back to living his life.
Yeah.
And, we actually did a New York couple who filed for divorce in the middle of COVID.
Interesting.
And he's trying to go out to see his girlfriend, and she's losing her mind and saying, like, you can't go out and see your girlfriend because you can't bring it home. I don't know who your girlfriend's seen and what kind of lockdown rules she's keeping. And like, Esther did not see a path for them. That was an interesting episode. That was one of the most tense episodes I think we've ever done, where they actively were fighting in the episode. But she told them, like, don't worry about what your future holds. You need to worry about just getting through this period we're living in right now.
Yeah. Such great advice. I think even if you're not in a committed relationship, that's just like, we all need to hear that right now. What do you feel like are some misconceptions that people have about podcast producing as a whole, that if you could shake people up, what would be that one thing that you're like, it's not like this?
I wish before I would have had a perfect answer for that. Before COVID, I would have been like, that you just make podcasts in your pajamas in your basement. Because that used to be like the big line of like what a quality podcast was. It's like, any jerk could make a podcast in his basement with 3 microphones and upload it to iTunes. Like, it doesn't cost you anything. Which is very true, but that's what we're all doing now. And I've edited so many things in my pajamas in the living room, so it's like, yeah. So I don't know what the myth about podcasting is anymore. I think that we're constantly, I've been really impressed with what people are putting out right now, and the way that they're finding to gather tape and to tell stories when we are all doing it like this on Zoom.
Yeah.
The way people are finding new ways to be creative, I think, is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the myth is. The myth is that we all do one, like that being a producer means something different every single day. And I think that's why I like it so much, is because it's never the same thing twice. So it's hard to describe to my mother or to anyone, like, this is what I do. It's like, this is what I did today. It's not what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. It's been described in many ways to me through this podcast, but I think that's a really good way of looking at it, where it's just really getting things done. You're just doing whatever it takes to get the thing done, whatever is needed within the resources to get it done. And if you have more help, there's different things you get to do. But if you're doing all alone, then there's certain things you have to do. Some parts of it you probably don't enjoy, and some parts you love, and I think that keeps producers particularly quite flexible in adapting every day to new challenges, real-time problem solving, to see that it is possible to get things done and to thrive, even if you have to work from your pajamas all day. It's all good, Yeah. It's like showing up with that good attitude every day. It's like, that's all we can really do.
And I feel like you can't keep a good producer down. It's like, a producer always has a plan A, B, C, and D, or however far it needs to go. It's like, okay, what are you going to throw at me? I can come back at you with this, and it's like, all right, well, it's going to rain. I'm going to come at you with this. Or you need me to figure out like what kind of fig plants we need for this. I can handle that.
Yep.
Like, we're problem solvers.
Which is why I think women particularly make such great producers, because it's like, this is just how most women I know in my world are built. Like, it can manifest in different ways, and some women don't have the personality necessarily that comes along with it. But in terms of this ability to multitask, problem solve, pivot, like have one thing spinning over here and this thing being thrown over here, and find a way to keep it all together, for the most part, we do pretty good. But sometimes, We're
Yeah, I mean, the
human.
ability to multitask. Women are so, I mean, I am a woman, so I can't speak for men, but just the ability to hold 12 things in your head at once and still function and
Hmm.
still, look presentable and like you have your shit together is, I'm always in awe.
Well, they say that it's because if you look at the way we've evolved, evolution is that women were always watching the children and watching for all the potential things that could go wrong so that they could save their children and save themselves. If men were out focused on a specific task of hunting, for example, bringing food back for the community, for the tribe, the women and the children were left, and there's a bunch of kids running around, there's all this shit happening, you have to be monitoring this massive space and corralling all of this all the time. So our brains naturally are wired for that. And it's there's this theory that later on, when women were more domesticated, it's why women started taking up crafts and doing things with their hands, because a woman's brain is such a crazy place that if you don't give them something to do to transmit that energy, they can literally go crazy. It was like one of the ideas. That's why you look at some of like Renaissance paintings, there's always a woman sewing or painting or doing something, because women cannot sit still. It's just where at, which is interesting. Yeah, don't quote me on that. I obviously haven't, like, I read that somewhere and I don't know where it was, but it stuck with me clearly. So
It explains a lot about like my mother and my grandmother, actually. I wonder what iPhones are going to do, especially like the hunting and gathering and the mail part has been replaced. Like I was just thinking about my husband was grilling turkey burgers tonight, and I was yelling at him because he was on his iPhone. I was like, you had one task, not to burn the turkey burgers. And I don't know what news alarm or Twitter alert or what happened on his phone, but there was something that totally got his attention, and it was not dinner.
the way our brains are going to change and be rewired because of technology, it's terrifying. But we'll see. We can't really control it at this point. Just trying to do damage control and manage as much as possible. But at any rate, I was curious, what makes audio a particularly good medium for certain types of stories, or for Esther's work versus some others? And in what ways is it a barrier? Do you think that there are some kinds of stories that should only exist in one medium versus the other? I think particularly with Hollywood coming into podcast land and adapting a lot of these podcasts. I don't know. I'm curious if you think it's necessary, the differences.
I don't think everything translates.
Mm-hmm.
I think that audio is the most intimate form of media, period. I think it's easy to fuck up too, because not a lot of people write for sound. And I think that's something that I definitely learned at NPR. And I think if you kind of came up in a world, an Ira Glass world, I mean, if you even just listen to the way that This American Life structures their show, I mean, they very much, the audio propels the story, just like a picture would. And I think that sometimes that gets lost when people who come in from other disciplines, like who don't write to the sound, or who don't think about the way that which the story needs to be told, because it's coming in through these tiny earbuds and you're interrupting somebody's daily flow. It's like people don't sit down to listen to a podcast the way that they sit down to take in a movie, or a television show. I mean, they do this while they're doing the 12 other things, or making their turkey burgers, or watching their kids in the yard, or their dishes, or on their way to work, or whatever. And it's definitely a life interruption. And so that changes the way that you tell a story, I think, and how you reach them. And sometimes you do have to repeat things in a story, because you're dealing with the subway announcer, or people are only going to get this one piece of information once. You want to make sure that you really, bring it home to them. But I feel like not everyone understands the level of intimacy that audio should hold in the world. And I think this lends itself to Esther really brilliantly, because it allows you to not focus on someone's features when you're listening to their story, or their problems, or their anxieties about the world, and to really internalize it. And then I think if you were looking at this couple on a couch, you would worry about like where his hands are, or how he fidgets with his picks at his thumbs, or, you know, your mind would go other places. And when you're taking in just their story and their breath, and you know, like you can hear them cry, you can hear like them starting to cry, you can hear
Yeah.
their throat tighten, you can hear all of these moments that I think that you might miss if you were watching their face.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it allows you to imprint yourself on their story. If I can't tell what color they are, or how much money they make, you know, or where they're from in the world, if I just hear their voices and their stories, it's such a beautiful way to make it my own.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful response, by the way.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
well done. How do you feel like the landscape has changed since 2014 when Serial came out?
Oh my God. I mean, so much. And I feel like, you know, I mean, I don't know how COVID will affect the world
Yeah.
and everything we're making. I can tell you that the numbers of new podcasts that were created in the month of April were ridiculous. So people are still going out and they're still making, and they're sitting in their basements and they're making these things by the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Whether or not the ad world will sustain that, I know it won't.
Right.
So I think we'll have to keep reinventing different revenue streams. You know, and since 2014, there have been so many different players who've come into this space to be disruptors.
Mm-hmm.
Then I don't know, you know, 4 years from now, it's still going to look very different, I
Yeah.
think. Everyone claims to be the HBO of audio. I feel like every new house that's open, that's been their slogan. And I don't know that we've yet to see an HBO of podcasting. I don't even really know what that means, but people love to banter it about. Yeah, I mean, I hope that we all continue to make really interesting things and share each other's content, and then it doesn't get too big where we don't know each other anymore. But I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious if the sheer volume of podcasts that are getting created, if that is good or bad, you know, for podcasting as a whole, like the if it's going to sort of crowd the small sort of little gap that people have to even get the thing they're creating out to find an audience. You know, I think that's the biggest challenge. And even with iTunes and getting published in their main page, which is how a lot of podcasts get discovered, even that now has become completely like, unless you're a celebrity or there's someone famous or a notable studio behind you, it's nearly impossible to do, which makes it that much harder to really get the traction and find your audience and build and get to the point where you can potentially monetize or have partners.
Or players with better search functions.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much stuff out there that you're right, that if someone isn't promoting it and it isn't in your face, you don't know it if it exists, and you may really want to listen to it. These may be your people, you just don't know where to find them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I can't think of a single search function on any app that's decent.
Yeah. It really limits you. And so I'm curious. I think we're obviously still in the infancy of podcasting as a whole. It's so new. It is such an intimate thing. And I've even, you know, I have this Zoom recorder, and during the holidays, I just sometimes will just have it recording moments with my family, because there's something so incredible about listening back to the sounds of the environment and the conversations and the snippets you hear here and there, that it's just so special. It's very different from filming it. You know, like you said, you really just, it's like you feel like you're transported to that time and place much more quickly than if you were seeing it happen. I think it maybe puts you inside the experience a little more, whereas when you're watching it, there's still this separation between me and what's going on over there. Maybe that's what it is. Like you can feel close, more inside of the experience. It's like virtual reality-ish.
I also feel like, you know, you remember a lot of your past in pictures.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like, do you really remember that time when you were 5 and this happened? Or do you just remember that picture that your mom had of that
Right. And
time?
then you think you have a memory because you saw the picture.
Right. But if you were to play back the sound, even like 3 minutes from that same picture, but you were just listening to it, it would be a memory, you know, because it would be so much more substantial than the snapshot that you have from that moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think is cool. And I love to I record my kids a lot.
Oh God, that's
Um,
amazing.
because they think it's funny, and they're not self-conscious. Like if I take my phone out, and they're smart. My 18-month-old understands like how to work my iPhone and how to take pictures of herself, and she's, you know, not even 2. And they're already self-conscious about their picture and what they look like and whether or not they want to be on camera. But if I get my microphone out, it's a totally different experience, and they'll ham it up, and they'll be their true selves, and they're like funny and loud, and you know, they're great because
Yeah.
this doesn't really make them self-conscious.
Right.
um, and I also feel like that goes away too, I think, as a grown-up. Like in Esther's office, if you walk in for a recording, there will be 4 mics in the room. And I think when you first get there, you're like, oh my God, there are microphones, you know, and people will lean in and be like, Jesse, can you cut that out of the show? You know, when they're doing a session. But then within like 5 minutes, it completely fades, and
Yeah.
people are themselves, and they're not self-conscious, and they're just in it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the beauty of a microphone, is that it's not super invasive. It lets you forget yourself and just, you know, have the session you need to have, or tell the story you want to tell.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's kind of lovely.
It is lovely. It is lovely. Switching gears to something not so lovely, I would love to hear about an experience you may have had throughout your journey, without throwing anybody under the bus, where you may have felt like, I don't know how I get through this. I don't think I want to continue doing this. But then you did it anyway, and you got to the other side. And what kept you going?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably had a few of those experiences. The one maybe most recent was I worked for a really big tech company after I worked at NPR for a while. And I got such an education working there, because I had gone from public radio where you knew everybody, you loved everybody, they were all your friends. I mean, literally, like I married a guy I met in public radio. Like these people are my family, they are wonderful, they are friends for life. You know, you make those
Yeah.
connections. Um, they were to me what like college, I think, was for a lot of people.
Mm.
But that you have to, you know, you really have to beg for every dollar that you get to spend. It's a hard place to, or this is where I came from. It was a hard place to make something new. And so going to a place like um, Amazon, where, you know, they give you very much at the time, they gave you the budgets you needed to make the shows you wanted, and they didn't get in your way.
Mm.
And learning how to craft a budget, and to be responsible for it, and to know what to ask for, and to be able to pitch in a room of non-creatives. Like I got a business degree, and felt like,
Mm.
and I'm really thankful for that experience in so many ways. And it allowed me to do and be what I am now, and who I am. And it brought me Esther, and it brought me my business partner. Now we kind of went through the war of leaving Audible together. And um, yeah, I would say that made me who I am now. But uh, I'd never been laid off, and that happened there, and it came as sort of a surprise. And not only they laid off, the whole team got laid off, and that
Mm.
wasn't anything I was prepared for. And I felt responsible for all of these people who I had brought on to work for me under this team. And I mean, yeah, I was worried about myself, but I was worried about where they were all going to go, and would they be happy there, and could they make the things that they wanted to make, and did I uphold my end of the bargain. And I also have this way of feeling like everyone's mother. Um, and so that was really hard to lose my team and to lose it like that.
Mm.
And then to feel that I needed to make sure they landed on their feet. And they all did, because they are wizards and wonderful producers and just smart, wonderful people. And the audio world, continues to need more people like that. And it's an ever expanding universe right now, and may it continue to be so.
Mm.
So everyone, I think, landed in even better places. In fact, one of the women who used to work for me won a Pulitzer this week.
Wow. Congrats to
And the
her.
place where she went next. So I feel and so incredibly proud of her. And that
Oh,
was the path she needed to be on. And it was good that things worked out the way that they did. And I think everyone is in a much better place, but that was really hard and really dark. And being the sort of like Tracy Flick overachiever, never been fired, never got laid off, never like, I always did my extra credit assignments. That was really hard for me personally too. I would do it all over again if I had to, because I
yeah.
learned so much and it brought me to where I am right now, but it was really shitty living in it.
Yeah.
And
So how did
yeah,
you, in that living in it time of your life, how did you get through it?
I kept making new things.
Nice.
And that's the only way that I know how to respond to any kind of trauma or stress. Even when COVID happened and I was driving in a car with my family to come to Connecticut to kind of have a yard so that my kids weren't all shoved into a 2-bedroom apartment for God knows how long, I was pitching. My partner I was on the phone with him and I'm like, these are the 2 shows we have to make. I don't know what staff we're going to make it with, and I don't know where everyone's going to be, and I don't know how to get microphones, but we're going to sort this all out, and here's who we should pitch it to. And like, that's how I deal with stress.
Yeah. You lean into it.
And I figure out like,
Yeah.
how can I contribute in some small way that will make things better?
Mm.
I think with getting laid off, it was, how can I help other people find their new path so that I feel a little more centered in my own? And
Yeah.
then this time it was, what's the story, or what are the stories I can tell during COVID that might make someone feel a little less alone?
Yeah.
I'm not working on a cure for COVID. I don't work in the government. Like, there's nothing I can do that will have an impact in a really profound way,
Yeah.
except, tell stories.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, thank you for telling those stories. So I guess the final question is, what advice you would have for someone who is listening, particularly who wants to produce podcasts. What would you say?
I would say, what would I say? I mean, I do this a lot. I mean, I take in cold calls from people who are like, I have this idea and can you help me figure it out? And it's like, I would say, find a place that is making the thing that you want to make, and figure out how to find your place within their team. And whether that's as a mentee, or that's as a junior producer, or that's as a senior producer, because that's the level that you're at. But, find the storytellers that really speak to you, and figure out, if you're new, how to center yourself in their universe. I hired a woman that I met on the subway platform because she was, she's amazing, but she had never produced in her life, but she was trying to make this podcast in her living room. And I spoke to her on the platform for, we had come out of a book event, and I had asked her, I was recording it, and I had asked her, I'd had a terrible experience at the event, and I thought maybe the event wasn't for me. So I asked her if she had had a similar experience, and then explained who I was so that I wasn't this weirdo. And she, told me what she thought of the event. And I don't know, we were both riding up to Harlem on the train, and she came over and sat next to me and said, introduced herself, said she was working on this podcast. And could I listen to it, and could I ever talk to her over a cup of tea or something at some point in time? And I'm like, sure, and then we followed up. I loved her so much in that tea. I'm like, I want to find space for you on my team. I know you've never edited tape before, and I know you work in marketing, but you're interested in this. Like, but would you want to come work for us? And I can teach you. I can't teach curious. I can't teach you to have an open mind, but I can train you for skill. I can teach you to cut tape, like no problem, but she came with all of these amazing skills that I want in a producer. And I just want in a person I want to be around.
Yeah.
But she was brave enough to come up and ask, like, would I listen to her podcast? It's like, I'll give you a job,
Yeah. That's incredible advice. I think that is transcends any field, any discipline of producing. I think that's the biggest advice people give on the show, is that be curious, be a good person, be somebody people want to be around. It sounds so obvious, but it's shocking that this is like beating a dead horse with this advice, that being a person who has the curiosity, has the enthusiasm for the thing is more important than the hard skills, because that you can learn. Someone can teach you all of the other stuff, but you can't make someone be a better version of themselves, be a better human, and be just willing to show up and do that, and I think that's incredible advice. That is a great reminder to have, because it's nice. It's nice to hear that. Yeah. So, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, I could keep talking to you forever, but I want to be mindful of time. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time, not to just talk to me today, but our other session, which was awesome.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this is great. And thank you so much for sharing your journey with me and the listeners. I know people get a lot of benefit out of hearing these intimate conversations about other people's journeys, especially women. And so I appreciate you taking the time to go there with me.
Well, I appreciate you making the show and for having me on it. I was deeply honored, and I know I don't work in television, so you're branching out into the audio world, and I think that's so cool.
Yeah, no, I think producers exist in all fields, and I want to talk to people who produce things that I know nothing about. It's my honor to get to do it.